Why do bad things happen? If God is omniscient and omnipresent and omnipotent, why does he allow bad things to happen? This is one of the most common questions I hear. And it is explained through the law of polarity. Existence itself is a recursive fractal mirror of God, of his imagination. Recursion is the inverse of the projection. This is the same thing as when you look in a mirror. What you see in the mirror is a less coherent version of the projection that you emanate. And that is what Earth is. It is the recursion of God's emanation. Now, the law of polarity shows that the recursion is an inverse of the projection. So unity becomes individuation, what we perceive as separation. This is how the one becomes the many. Now, because it is a recursive fractal mirror, this same pattern plays out multiple steps down. We are a recursion of God's emanation, and the cells of our bodies are a recursion of us. And then the circumstances of our lives are also a recursion of us. It's a gradient of expression. Everything requires a gradient, which the law of polarity is the most fundamental gradient. It is the foundation of all gradient. Now, just like we are the mirror of his emanation, even the cells of our body are the mirror of ours. The choices we make are reflected in the cells of our body. And yet the cells of our body have relative will within the bounds of their design and what relationships they hold. Because existence is based in the law of polarity, it means all of existence is relational. Without the projection and recursion, no experience could even be possible at all. Because if you don't have the reflection, when you imagine, there's nothing to perceive. You won't even see your own imagination because there's no reflection back to you. There's no cycling if there's no polarity. So the fact that the earth is a recursion of God's emanation, it means that it is the inversion of his emanation. And this explains why Satan is the god of this world, or so it says in the Bible, because it is the inversion. And that explains why everything here seems so inverted. I mean, if you're even remotely aware, everything seems extremely inverted. But that inversion itself, it is what allows for depth, contrast in the mirror of existence. It's what allows for genuine relationship with God to exist as an individual. Because without the relative choice of choosing God or lies, because God is truth, then there would be no reflection, there would be no choice, there would be no experience, no existence. And so there would be no relationship with God. Because we are a recursion and existence itself is relational, what this essentially means is that it is our job, our responsibility to abide in God and maintain a relationship with God, because God is truth itself. You see, truth is omnipresent, and it must be omnipresent in order to even be true. Because if anything was left out, the truth would be missing something, and by definition, it could no longer be deemed true. So, it is our relationship with the truth that sets us free, because only God is sovereign, because He is at the absolute top of the gradient, because He is omnipresent. We are emanations of Him, but we are individuations of Him. We do not experience omnipresence. And so it is only through our relationship to Him that we can be set free. If we turn away from God and we close off the full cycle of experience, we become a looping recursion that does not surrender the charge of life back up to God. What this essentially does is continues to cycle inversion over and over again, and it builds up more and more pressure, more and more charge, more and more ego. Over time, this absolutely forces existence itself to reflect that choice, and it manifests in the health of our bodies, the relationships we have in our lives, the circumstances that we experience in our lives and in the world as a whole, because it is electromagnetics. The projective side, think of it like a toroidal field, a donut. The projective side shoots out, the receptive side receives, takes in, brings into the center, and compresses it all and surrenders it back up to the projective side. The middle point, the singularity in the middle, is where everything is resolved, the 0 point, so that the new projection that comes out is more coherent because it has integrated everything that the receptive side has taken in. It has integrated what the mirror has shown so that it can move with more coherence. Now, if you have rejected God, you close off your ability to surrender the recycling charge. And so all it can do is re-loop back through you again while splitting, because it is a recursion, and so it's even less coherent than it was before because it has not been integrated, but you're also taking in new charge. And this, like I said, it builds pressure. Now, this pressure will force you to become aware, like your boundaries in this existence must be exposed and exploited. They must. It is the nature of a projective and recursive mirror. You can't look in a mirror and wave at it, but it just doesn't reflect your hand. Like, no, the choices you make will be reflected in the mirror that existence is. And the more you deny that reflection, the more undeniable it will make itself through the consequences that you experience. So ultimately, the question of why do bad things happen in this world ultimately it is because of our refusal to have a relationship with God as a whole. When we turn away from Him and we refuse to integrate the mirror, the reflection that we receive, which is communication, then we are blinded to our frame of reference for how to move properly. We blind ourselves from consequences. And this arises as the ego. What does the ego do? It tries to avoid accountability. And the way it avoids accountability is through a variety of mental gymnastics. Direct avoiding of accountability, blame shifting, projection. Projection is a big one that the ego does because it does not perceive its interconnection because it has severed its own recycling full cycle flow. And so it is never brought into coherence. And so when it experiences its own imagination, the ego then paints the outside world as that in order to avoid taking accountability for itself, for its own incoherence. The ego then labels the world as incoherent, when really it is always observing its own reflection. Always, because existence itself is a mirror. And this can even be explained logically, the existence being a mirror, because as you witness information, a person, a circumstance, anything, as you witness it, you will only experience your own version of it, and what you experienced is entirely dependent on the relationships that you abide in. Your relationships can be the food you eat. Your relationships can be the language that you use in daily life with yourself and others. Your relationships can be the circumstances that you self-identify through, like your job, or you're a parent, or your relationships can be with truth itself, with God, or with your refusal to acknowledge Him. So, depending on what relationships you abide in, is the experience that you will have in relationship to what you experience. It's essentially a frequency mirror. All of your relationships together produce a frequency, and you project that frequency into existence, and then you receive that frequency back, the recursion of that frequency. And the recursion is fractal, multiple, the cells of your body, the health that you experience, the circumstances of your life, the things people say to you in your presence. It's all connected with your inner reality, because projection and recursion are not separate. Now, ultimately, what this shows, though, is recursion is always downstream of projection. And this is how and why God knows the end from the beginning and has already won the perceptual war that we perceive. Because He is the absolute top of all gradients, because He is pure coherence itself. And that is where all the gradients, the fractalizations of emanation, stem from, is pure, perfect coherence. And they must stem from pure, perfect coherence in order for existence to have any level of consistency and stability and structure. Without it emanating from absolute pure coherence, existence itself would be unstable and chaos would be real. But chaos is illusory, it's not real. What we perceive as chaos is just a perceptual misunderstanding from not being able to track the cause and effect chain up the ladder. And inversion, although you think coherence is pure order, so the inversion of that, the incoherence or decoherence, is all of a sudden chaos, is absolutely not the case. The inversion of pure coherence is perfectly mathematically structured inversion. It is not random, it is not by chance. And this is necessary in order for us to experience consistency and consequences through our lives. If we didn't have consequences, we could never build a frame of reference for anything. But consequences exist, and they are serving us to know God with more clarity and more depth. Because as we experience the consequences for turning away from Him in this relational experience of existence, we get to know Him more clearly by reverse engineering the pattern of existence itself. And so the bad that exists in the world fundamentally is serving us. It is revealing where we have turned away, both individually and collectively. And it serves as rungs in the ladder of coherence. And if we have a relationship with God, the pure, absolute, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent coherence that permeates all of existence, then we will climb the ladder because of the torque provided by the bad, by the incoherence, by the recursion, by the mirror. The mirror is designed for us to have a relationship with God and have a frame of reference for who He is. It is a gift that has been given to us, and the bad that we experience is our responsibility because we have relational, relative choice in our individuated experience. Now, the fundamental consequences for continuously turning away from God is you become more and more incoherent. This reaches a point where you no longer have enough coherence to maintain form because you become too dispersed, too incoherent, too it's like light dispersing into the darkness. It gets to a point where the emanation is so dispersed that there's no longer detectable light. It's at the boundary where you become like static. It's a signal that is so filled with static that it's no longer even a signal, it's just static itself. This is when we end up disintegrating ourselves from existence as an individuation. And that is why it is said that the consequences of sin is death. Because incoherence, if it is refused to be brought into coherence, if we refuse to surrender, it has no choice but to disintegrate itself through the accumulation of entropy. So, ultimately, the structure of existence is a multidimensional mirror that is serving us to know ourselves more clearly, and through knowing ourselves, we of course come to know His nature, because existence is or stems from his emanation. It is his emanation. It through fractalized through the law of polarity and gradients. So that is why bad things happen. It is our responsibility to choose God and to honor him and to have a relationship with him and to proliferate that relationship in all that we do. The more we do that, the less the bad has room to express itself in our lives. It's not that the bad cannot exist, but the more we embrace God, the more clarified the path becomes. And the more clarified it becomes, the less the bad is perceived as an attack, and the more it is received as feedback so that we can surrender to God in new ways that we had previously been refusing. And this is what ascension is. It is ascension up the ladder of coherence. And the closer we get to God, the more it is apparent that existence itself is serving us, because existence itself is serving him. And it stops being an attack, and it starts being a service that we receive. All right. I guess I'll leave it there. I love you all. Thank you. Have a blessed day.